Hello to all of our YouTube friends. Since today is Thursday and we usually have a historic perspective of the car that we featured the previous Sunday, we would be doing the history of the first generation Camaros, built from 1967 through 1969. However, we have done this before in episode 15. Since our feature car last Sunday was a 396 powered 69 Camaro, we thought doing the brief history of the legendary big block engines from Chevrolet would be interesting. Believe me, from researching these engines, they definitely have an interesting story. So sit back and be ready to learn a thing or two about the engine series that has powered many a muscle car and became famous almost right after the 348 debuted in 1958. Now, let's go for a ride. Big block is a general term for an engine that is physically larger than other engines from the same manufacturer. Generally speaking, big block engines will have a larger cubic inch displacement number, but not all big cube motors are technically big blocks, like the Pontiac 455 for example. The focus of our story today is the Chevrolet big block, and this engine definitely fits the description I just went over. Larger displacement numbers and a physically bigger block than their small block contemporaries. The Chevy big block engine came in a variety of different designs and displacements, and all are unique to each series. Chevrolet had introduced their popular small block V8 in 1955, but as their cars became increasingly larger and heavier, it was clear that they would need something more substantial, and engineers were also designing a new power plant for their medium-duty trucks. The cars would get bigger for 1958 and could easily accommodate a larger engine. The first version of this Chevrolet engine, known as the W Series, was introduced this year. It had an overhead valve design with offset valves and uniquely shaped valve covers, looking like the letter W and giving it a distinct appearance. The W Series was produced from 1958 to 1965, and they had three different displacement options. The 348, available from 1958 to 1961 in cars and in light trucks through 1964. The legendary 409, available from 1961 to 1965 in cars only, and the 427 engine, which was only briefly available in 1962 and 1963 as a special order race-only engine. Cylinder blocks and heads were both made of cast iron, and the heads used on the high-performance 409 and 427 engines had larger ports and valves than those used on the 348 and the base 409 passenger car and truck engines. Due to the relatively low mass of the valve train, mechanical lifter versions of the W Series engine were easily capable of operating well beyond 6,000 RPMs. The combustion chamber of the W Series engine was in the upper part of the cylinder, not in the head. The head only had tiny recesses for the valves. As the piston approached top dead center, the angle of the crown combined with that of the head deck formed a wedge-shaped combustion chamber with a pronounced quench area. The spark plugs were inserted vertically into the quench area, which helped to produce a rapidly moving flame for more complete and efficient combustion. These W engines had a dry weight of approximately 665 pounds on average, depending on the type of intake manifold and carburation systems present. With a 4-barrel carburetor, the base turbo thrust 348 produced 250 horsepower. A special tri-power triple 2-barrel version, called the Super Turbo Thrust, produced 280 horsepower. A special turbo thrust further upped the power output to 305 with a single large 4-barrel carburetor. Mechanical lifters and triple 2-barrel carburetors brought the special Super Turbo Thrust up to 315 horsepower. For 1959 and 60, high-output versions of the top two engines were produced with a 4-barrel rated at 320 horsepower and added 15 more horses with the 3 carbs. For its final season in 1961, power again was increased to 340 horsepower for the single 4-barrel models, and 350 when equipped with triple 2 barrels. Incredibly, with just some minor mechanical changes from year to year, the initial output of the 348 in 58 was 250 horses and ended up 4 years later at 350. Wow. A 409 cubic inch upgrade was Chevrolet's new top regular production engine from 1961 to mid-1965, with a choice of single or dual 4-barrel Rochester carburetors. On December 17, 1960, the 409 engine was officially announced, along with the Impala Supersport models. Since they were not well publicized, very few were built for the abbreviated model year in 1961 and are now among the most highly sought-after muscle cars of the early 60s. The initial version of this engine produced 360 horsepower with a single 4-barrel Carter AFB carburetor. The same engine was up to 380 horsepower in 1962. A 409 horsepower version of this engine was also available, developing 1 horsepower per cubic inch with a dual 4-barrel aluminum intake manifold and 2 Carter AFB carburetors. It also had a forged steel crankshaft. This dual quad version was immortalized in the Beach Boys song titled 409. In the 1963 model year, power output reached an astonishing 425 horsepower with the Rochester 2 4-barrel carb setup, a compression ratio of 11:1, and a solid lifter camshaft. This engine was available through mid-1965, when it was replaced by the 396 cubic inch 375 horsepower Mark IV big block engine. It should be mentioned that a milder 340 horsepower version of the 409 engine was available from 1963 to 1965, using a single 4-barrel cast iron intake manifold with a Rochester 4GC square bore carburetor and a hydraulic lifter camshaft. A special 427 cubic inch edition of the 409 engine was used in the 1963 Impala Sport Coupe, ordered under Chevrolet's regular production option code of Z11. A high-rise 2-piece aluminum intake manifold and dual Carter AFB carbs fed a monstrous 13.5:1 compression ratio to produce a severely underrated 430 horsepower. This was a special package created for drag racers as well as NASCAR, and it consisted of these engines bolted under the hoods of cars with lightweight aluminum body panels and a cowl-inducted air intake system. Only 50 of these incredible Z11 cars were ever produced at the Flint, Michigan plant. The so-called mystery motor, known internally at GM as the Mark II or Mark IIS, was a race-only engine produced for the 1963 season. During its debut, it was considerably faster than the iconic W Series powered cars. This engine was first used in Mickey Thompson's Z06 Corvettes at Daytona in the 1963 Daytona 250 miles American Challenge Cup, and then in Smokey Yunick's 1963 Daytona 500 record-setting Chevrolet stock car. This secret engine was a unique design incorporating aspects of both the W Series and the mid-1965 introduced Mark IV, commonly referred to in sales literature as the Turbojet V8. The Mark IV series is the one that most muscle car enthusiasts know best. While many of the components that were developed from regular production and racing the W Series would be utilized in the new Mark IV engines, the most obvious and significant difference was found in the cylinder heads. The valves continued to use the displaced arrangement of the W Series engine, but were slightly inclined so that they would open away from the combustion chamber and cylinder walls, a design feature made possible by Chevrolet's stud-mounted rocker arms. This alteration in valve displacement resulted in a significant improvement in volumetric efficiency at higher RPMs, and it also made a substantial increase in power at racing speeds. Owing to the appearance of the compound angularity of the valves, the automotive press dubbed this new engine the Porcupine design. Nicknamed the Rat Motor by enthusiasts because the small block had earlier been nicknamed the Mouse, It was slightly heavier than the W Series, with a dry weight of about 685 pounds. Aside from the new cylinder head design and the design of a conventional 90-degree cylinder head deck angle, the Mark IV shared many dimensional and mechanical design features with the W Series engines. The cylinder block, although more substantial in all respects, used many of the same lower-end component specifications of its predecessor, with a few exceptions. I'll discuss all of the Mark IV engines briefly by their cubic inch displacement, starting with the smallest, the 366. It was used only in Chevrolet medium-duty trucks and in school buses. This engine was made from the 1960s until 2004. It was designed from the very beginning as a truck engine. The 366 was produced only as a tall deck engine, with a deck height nearly 1/2 inch taller than the 396, 402, and 454 short deck big blocks. Next, the 396 cubic inch V8 was first introduced in the 1965 Corvette as the L78 option and in the Z16 Chevelle as the L37 option. It produced an impressive 375 horsepower. The solid lifter version was capable of being operated into the upper 6,000 RPM range, and when installed in the 1965 Corvette, was factory rated at 425 horses. In the Impala, it replaced the 409 mid-year in 1965. There was even a version of the solid lifter L78 that was equipped with aluminum heads, making it an L89. Introduced in 1970, the 402 cubic inch engine was actually a 396 bored out by 3/1000ths of an inch. Despite the fact that it was 6 cubic inches larger, Chevrolet continued marketing it under the popular 396 label in the smaller cars, while at the same time labeling it Turbojet 400 in the full-size cars. The highly successful and versatile 427 cubic inch version of the Mark IV engine was introduced in 1966 as a production engine option for full-size Chevrolets and Corvettes. The bore was increased to 4 1/4 inch, with power ratings varying depending on the application. There were smooth-running versions with hydraulic lifters suitable for powering the family station wagon, as well as rough idling, high-revving solid lifter motors usually applied to minimally equipped, plain-looking cars fitted with the 425 horsepower version of the L72 427. Undoubtedly, the ultimate 427 for street applications was the 435 horse L71 version available in the 1967 to 1969 Corvettes. This engine was identical to the 425 horse version, but was fitted with 3 2-barrel Holley carburetors, known as Tri-Power. Both engines used the same high lift, long duration, high overlap camshaft, and large port cast iron cylinder heads to maximize cylinder head airflow at elevated engine operating speeds. Consequently, these engines offered very similar performance and resulted in a car whose characteristics were described by one automotive journalist as, quote, the ultimate in sheer neck-snapping overkill, unquote. Typical magazine road tests of the day yielded quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range. The 1969 ZL1 version of the 427 engine was developed primarily for Can-Am racing, where it was very successful in cars like the McLaren M8B. The first Corvette ZL1 engine package was built in late fall of 1968 and featured aluminum closed-chambered heads, until sometime in 1969 when the Corvette ZL1 changed to having open combustion chamber heads, as the 1969 L88 had. The ZL1 engine also featured a lightweight aluminum water pump, a camshaft that was slightly hotter than the L88's, and a specially tuned aluminum intake manifold. Idle characteristics were quite erratic, and this engine required high-octane fuel, two traits that did not make it very usable for the street. The astoundingly high $4,718 cost for the ZL1 option instantly doubled the price of a 1969 Corvette. Only 2 production Vettes and another 69 Camaros were ever built with the ZL1. Chevrolet would soon capitalize on the 427 design by producing a wide variety of high-performance, over-the-counter replacement crate engines, as well as individual components. Beginning in 1969, all of the Performance 427 engines were fitted with the new open-chambered iron cylinder heads, along with design improvements for all of the rotating internal parts, all developed for the Can-Am program. For 1970, the cubic inch displacement of the Rat engine was enlarged again to 454 cubic inches. This year's Corvette used the LS5 version of this engine and was factory rated at 390 horsepower, and the next step-up LS6 engine was equipped with a single 4-barrel 800 CFM Holley carburetor and was rated at a nearly unbelievable 450 horses. This mill was also available in the Chevelle and El Camino models and are among the most highly sought-after cars from the muscle car era. An even more powerful version of the 454 was the LS7, not to be confused with the modern mid-2000s 7-liter Chevrolet Corvette engine that powered the C6 generation's Z06. It put out 465 horsepower but was never factory installed. By 1972, only the LS5 remained for engines displacing 454 cubes, and 1974 would be the final year of the 454 in the Corvette, although the Chevelle offered it to the first half of 1975, and it was also available in the full-sized Impala and Caprice through the model year 1976. The 454 would continue to be used on light-duty trucks throughout the next 2 decades. 1987 would be the first year they were fuel-injected. Other variations of the Mark IV engines would also be seen powering an extensive array of Chevrolet and GMC medium-duty trucks, as well as in Bluebird Corporation's All-American and TC2000 transit buses. Finally, the iconic Mark IV engines would also be found widely used in powerboats. Many of these engines were ordinary Chevrolet production models that were fitted with the necessary accessories and drive systems to adapt them to marine propulsion. Mercury Marine, in particular, was a major user of these Mark IV engines and relabeled the engines with their corporate logos. For 1991, General Motors made significant changes to their big block design, resulting in the Generation 5. Internally, structural changes made to the cast iron cylinder blocks to improve the integrity of the bores, and the block now utilized a one-piece rear main seal and all received 4-bolt main caps. The 502 utilized a cast iron 4-bolt main block. GM offered it in their performance parts catalog, available as multiple crate motors with horsepower ratings from 338 to 600 in both base and deluxe packages. The Ramjet 502 was the 496 horsepower version and was offered with fuel injection as a complete turnkey setup, which included all the wiring and electronics needed to work flawlessly in any vehicle. Seeing how popular new crate engines were among their performance-minded clients, General Motors began offering a newly developed 572 cubic inch monster in 1998 via its GM Performance Parts division. Initially, this engine was capable of producing 620 horsepower. It was appropriately designated ZZ 572 620 Deluxe and runs on 92 octane pump gasoline for street applications. Another version of this same engine is available as a high compression variant, codenamed ZZ 572 720R Deluxe, generating, well, you guessed it, 720 horses on high-octane racing fuel. The last version of the Chevrolet Big Block was the Vortex series, a 7400 series displacing 454 cubic inches, was available until the end of 1995. The following year, the 8100 debuted, very similar to the 7400, but having more advanced technology. Today, there are many aftermarket companies supplying parts to feed the enormous demand that still exists for all things Chevy Big Block. It's now possible to build an entire engine and not use one GM supplied part. Attend any car show, drag race, or circle track event, not to mention off-roading and untold commercial applications, and you'll undoubtedly find a big block Chevy. Although the technology of the LS engines exceeds the relative basic mechanical makeup of the old big blocks, they are plentiful, and unless you need a rare numbers matching part for a restoration, parts are relatively inexpensive, and modifying them is also far cheaper, at least compared to many of their contemporaries, and enthusiasts are very familiar with them. There are countless books on the subject, and many clubs and online forums offer tricks of the trade in getting the most out of them. Well, we hope you've enjoyed our brief history of one legendary engine. Hit that thumbs up button and like this video. Share it with your friends. If you're not a subscriber, it's free, and then you'll never miss any of our videos. Coming up this next Sunday, we'll be featuring a one-owner 1986 Ford Mustang SVO. Don't miss it. Remember, stay safe and be careful out there.